Disclaimer. And it's not a typical disclaimer. This week, we have a cat in the house who has the zoomies, so you may potentially hear the pitter-patter of tiny feet, the odd expletive from Em, and the odd cameo from John coming to retrieve him. We're sorry if that happens.
I'm very sorry.
Also, you may hear, if Em's a little bit quieter, she has had a semi-root canal today, so we're trying to be nice.
But we're here to give you, our wonderful listeners, the content that we promised.
Yes.
So I'm doing this for you.
Such a sacrifice. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Right, shall we get on with the show?
I think we should.
Welcome back, dear listeners, to another Spooktober episode, where we bring you weekly episodes of the weird, wonderful, and definitely dark parts of human history and folklore to celebrate the spooky season.
Ooh. This week we take a look at an author whose life as well as works put her firmly as the mother of modern horror science fiction, and with very good reason. It is of course Mary Shelley. We look at her life, which is every bit as interesting and gothic as her fiction, as well as that fateful night when one of the most iconic monsters was created, as well as his creature.
And in this week's Ridiculous Death, we look at a time when a turkey committed murder most foul. See what I did there?
Yeah, I did, and I enjoyed it. So, grab your poetic pals, find the nearest graveyard, pay your electricity bills, and let's get dark.
Whilst we know her best as Mary Shelley, that was her married name. She was actually born as Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin on the 30th of August 1979 in London. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, sadly passed away 11 days after giving birth to young Mary, leaving her to be raised by her father, William Godwin. Her mother was a renowned feminist and had some very interesting ideas on the roles of women in society, even publishing a work entitled The Vindication of the Rights of Women. Wollstonecraft and Godwin must have made quite a formidable intellectual pairing.
Absolutely. Godwin herself had gone down in history as a novelist, but was primarily a political philosopher, focusing on the questions around the legitimacy of government and the nature of political animal. He is credited as having been one of the initial proponents of the concept of
utilitarianism.
That's such a fun word.
It is. It kind of rolls off the tongue, but at the same time it doesn't.
Utilitarianism.
Yeah. Do you want to explain what that is?
Absolutely not. But I will see if I will try my best. Basically, utilitarianism is the concept where actions that promote happiness or pleasure are right, whereas actions promoting unhappiness or pain are wrong. And in this context, not just of the person doing it, but everyone else involved or affected by that action as well. It works on the idea of consequentialism, where actions or ethics need to be evaluated against their consequences. Utilitarianism focuses on the consequences of actions on the many rather than on a single person. This is a vast oversimplification, if you can believe that. So if you want to learn more, we would recommend looking into it.
It is a philosophical minefield, but it does give rise to some interesting questions.
I always thought the term philosophical minefield is in itself
a philosophical minefield.
Yeah.
It's an interesting. I wish I could have studied philosophy at school. My brother did.
I bet you would have been good at philosophy.
It's that constant question. I'm very much a fan of what's called the Socratic method, which is just why.
That just annoys me. Why?
But if you do it often enough, you can really break things down. And I have to do it at work. If someone says, "Oh, I want this report," why? To show me these things, why? And yeah, it can be frustrating, especially when a toddler does it. But it's a good way to get down to the root of something and realise if you actually even want it.
Yeah.
Although that kind of thing did lead to Socrates getting killed. So.
And Hippocrates killing himself.
That was Socrates killing himself.
Was it?
Hippocrates drank wee.
Oh.
Yeah.
I know it was the kitties.
Yeah. There's always an Acrates, Ocrates, Icrites.
Yeah.
Hypotenuse, hippopotamus. We've digressed.
We have very much digressed.
Mary Shelley. So, Godwin gave Mary a strong education. So they probably had conversations like that.
Yep.
But as part of that, she was raised in his political and philosophical theories, so they probably would have had conversations like that.
I would have.
At the age of 4, Mary had a new mother figure enter her life when her father married Mary Jane Claremont, who we're going to call Claremont so we don't get the Marys confused.
Good shout.
Mary had a fractious relationship with her new stepmother, but she got on better with her sister, Claire Claremont, who's sometimes also known as Jane. Her name was originally Jane, but then it was later changed to Claire.
But if your surname is Claremont, why do you want to be called Claire Claremont?
I mean, why not?
I'm not even going there. You wide.
I did why. I didn't why, I why notted.
Please continue.
Godwin and Claremont would go on to have a further child, William Jr. It should be stated here that Mary already had an older half-sister called Fanny Imlay, who was a product of her mother Mary Wollstonecraft following an affair with a soldier, who Godwin, in fairness to him, raised following Wollstonecraft's death.
Oh.
It must have been quite an interesting family dynamic. So you had Fanny and Mary, and then you had Mary's half-brother William Jr. and their stepsister Claire Claremont.
But Fanny was also a half-sister.
Yeah, so a half-sister and a half-brother and a stepsister.
That's fun. We touched on the fact that Mary and her stepmother had a troubled relationship, and this manifested in the latter's attitude towards education. Claremont had her daughter, Claire, sent away to school for a formal education, but it was not felt that Mary needed to be educated. This would be a blocker to many, but Mary turned this to her advantage.
Godwin was a very learned man, with a number of influential literary friends, such as William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So Mary grew up surrounded by literary greats, with access to books through her father to be able to help to escape, whilst also extending her vocabulary and understanding of the world around her. Described as a dreamy and imaginative child, which I think both of us were probably described as that at some point.
Yep.
Mary would often spend time reading, sitting by her mother's grave, possibly as a way to feel close to her mother when her relationship with her stepmother was somewhat lacking.
This extensive reading and active imagination led Mary to start writing creatively, publishing her first poem called
Monsieur Nongtongpo.
Okay. In 1807. This was printed through her father's company, so it can be inferred that he was supportive of her creative endeavours. Mary continued to grow and develop, including travel in her life when she visited Scotland in the mid of 1812 to stay with the family of one of her father's friends, William Baxter. The escape from her standard home life was a good experience for the young Mary, and it was somewhere that she returned to, but there was soon to be something or someone at home to make her want to remain, for now.
Enter stage left, Percy. This person, one of her father's stewards, the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. Shelley, at this point, was already married to one Harriet Shelley, but the connection between him and Mary was undeniable. Their passion grew, and in a truly scandalous act, Mary and Percy ran away together to France and then travelled across to Europe, bringing Mary's stepsister Claire Claremont with them, much to the anger of her father, leading to a break in the relationship between Mary and Godwin that would take a long time to heal.
That's sad, because her father was always on her side, and I feel like they had each other through all the crap.
He was, and he was like, he was pretty much a slave to her education. He wanted her to have the best homeschooling and to really indulge her and her questioning. But then she met a man and she ran away.
Brilliant.
Men.
However, the scandal increased in 1815 when the trio returned to England, but it was found that they had an extra passenger as young Mary was pregnant with Percy's child.
Dun, dun, dun.
Mm-hmm. The withdrawal of support from her family, along with the social scandal, made things very difficult for the young couple, and the fact that Percy was still very much married. Later that same year, Mary gave birth to a premature child, but the infant was short-lived and the couple mourned their loss.
We're going to take a little bit of a sidestep here, just to tell the story of someone who's kind of integral to the picture, but gives a kind of a gothic spin to things, because it's all been normal so far. You okay? You pulling some
I have really, really bad pins and needles in my leg, and you just leant back on my leg.
I am sorry.
And the pain.
I apologise.
I was trying to nurse it, and I didn't expect you to lean back upon my leg.
You are really suffering for the show tonight.
I really am. I hope you appreciate me.
I always appreciate you.
Oh,
And they appreciate you more.
I hope so.
So, back to the funny stuff. A second tragedy.
We're not laughing at the tragedy, we're laughing at the circumstances in which the tragedy seems to be going in this episode.
This episode is a tragedy. The second tragedy soon followed in 1816, and it's one that's actually still shrouded in mystery, fit for a Gothic novel, which is why I wanted to include it. It's a history mystery.
I hate
We
history
know-
mystery.
Yep. So Percy and his wife Harriet had been separated for some time by this point, owing to his relationship with Mary.
Shocker.
The original Shelley couple had been married in 1811 after eloping to Scotland following a short and whirlwind romance. Records seem to suggest that Harriet's mental health was troubled at this point, however, it did not stop the wedding from going ahead. Things soured pretty quickly, however, and despite having a daughter together, within 3 years there were rifts in the marriage, with Percy claiming that he never wished to marry and insinuating that he had somehow been trapped into the idea, fully blaming Harriet. By then, he had met Mary, and soon after ran away with the then 16-year-old, which was the same age that Harriet had been when they were married.
So he liked a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
At this time, if there was a social scandal, it would not just be cause issue for the people involved, but also for the family of the people, leading to them being basically ostracised by society, in case friends and acquaintances would somehow become tainted by association. This happened to poor Harriet. As Percy and Mary carried out their decidedly public affair, it was doubly hard for Harriet as she was also pregnant at this time. She was in limbo between being married or not, but with no real agency available for women without a great deal of wealth and title. There was no choice for Harriet but to suffer through it, whilst her husband had his way with Mary and no longer cared about her and their children.
Harriet returned to her father's house with her daughter to bring her pregnancy to term, and because she really had nowhere else to go. In November 1814, she gave birth to a son that she named Charles, and together they continued to live at her father's house. In the following 2 years, she endured as her husband travelled to Europe with his new mistress, and she had, though subsequently lost, his child. That's Mary had lost his child.
Ah, okay.
Eventually, it must have become too much for poor Harriet, and this is where records get a little misty, so we're going to report what we know.
In September of 1816, Harriet vanished from her father's home, leaving her 2 young children behind. We know now that she visited a lodging house in Hans Place in Knightsbridge, London, and gave her name as Harriet Smith, saying that she was staying there whilst her husband was abroad. Technically not a lie, but there was a good reason for her to tell this story. You see, a woman travelling alone was enough to raise questions, but a pregnant woman? Yes, Harriet was pregnant, meaning that Percy wasn't the only one meeting his needs elsewhere. It has been deduced that she may have fled from her father's house when it no longer became possible to conceal her pregnancy, where questions would definitely have been raised. The father of the child is not concretely known, with some biographers suggesting it could still have been Percy's following a clandestine meeting in London, but this may be something we have to chalk up to another history mystery.
There's some people that also suggest it might have been the child of a soldier. No one really knows. Harriet then seems to disappear for a short time, and her movements are currently lost to time. The next thing we know is that early in the morning on the 10th of December 1816, one John Leavesley was on his way through Hyde Park when he spotted something floating in the nearby Serpentine. On closer inspection, it was found to be the body of a young woman, and following examination, he inferred that she'd been in the water for several days by this point. The body was taken to the nearby Fox and Bull Inn in Knightsbridge, where it was identified as that of Mary Shelley.
Harriet Shelley.
Harriet Shelley, sorry, not Mary Shelley.
Mary not dead yet.
Mary not dead yet. And she was discovered to be in a late stage of pregnancy. The verdict given was that she'd taken her own life. Whether due to her pregnancy, the actions of Percy and Mary, or other external factors, we will never know.
That's really sad.
It is.
But we don't know what she did. Where was she?
We don't know where she went. All we know is that she was in that boarding house in Knightsbridge, and then after that she just kind of disappears from the record until her body's found about a month later.
That's sad. But she changed her name. She changed it already to Harriet Smith. She changed it again.
Yeah, she could have been anywhere. She could have been with anyone. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And they ruled verdict by suicide, but we can't concretely say that either.
No. That's sad. But word reached Percy and Mary whilst in Europe about the death of Harriet, which was hot on the heels of another tragedy, as Mary had recently learned of the death by suicide of her half-sister Fanny. It had been a mixed year for Mary, and she had lived through the loss of her half-sister, and now Harriet was gone. But that summer, something had happened which would change her life and help her go down in history. In short, she had gone to Geneva. Here's how the story goes.
So, whilst travelling, Mary and Percy had joined with renowned poet Lord Byron, who is a fascinating figure who, at the time, may or may not have been under a self-imposed exile from England following charges of incest with his own sister. But Byron is fascinating for all the wrong reasons. And a young doctor named John Polidori, who had been paid to write a diary of his adventures by none other than Byron's old publishers so that they could actually write a scandal story about Byron. The group came together because of Claire Claremont, Mary's stepsister, who'd been involved in her own scandal with Byron, which had left her pregnant. She, considering it was supposed to be a prudish time with scandal, so many people just randomly up and getting pregnant.
It's because they didn't do safe sex. There was no such thing. People had the sex, and then they always seem. It's not actually that easy to make a child.
It's not.
But it seems that you have the sex one time and have the baby.
Yeah, back then, you sneeze near someone and boom, pregnant.
Absolutely.
So the group had come together because of Claire, and she brought them together in the hopes of rekindling this passion with Byron, who allegedly was really not feeling it at first. But hey, poets can change their minds. He clearly needed to write a new poem, so I thought, you know what? Why not?
The group convened on the shores of Lake Geneva, where Percy and Byron hit it off immediately, slightly sidelining poor Mary. Staying in the small hamlet of
Cologne,
Byron hired out the villa
Diodati
because he could afford it. He's Byron.
Yeah.
Whilst Percy and Mary stayed in a lakeside house because they could not afford it. This is where things get beautifully gothic and truth becomes stranger than fiction.
In 1815, the Indonesian volcano Mount Tambora had undergone a rather spectacular eruption, resulting in a massive ash cloud that would make the recent Icelandic incident several years ago seem weak.
Wow.
This had a knock-on effect on the climate, and it effectively delayed the onset of European summer, and it created a continual rainstorm from about mid-June 1816, and powerful thunderstorms.
Wow.
The atmosphere must have been incredible, but it was not really ideal for holiday making, and the group was forced to spend a lot of time indoors rather than, roaming around the Swiss countryside.
Fair. One night, fueled by plenty of wine and laudanum, which was liquid opium. Do not try this at home. The group decided to start swapping scary stories and poems. Horror stories and hallucinogenics. What could go wrong?
Are you ready for Carrie's random facts?
In the middle.
In the middle.
Okay, do. Carrie's random facts in the middle of this episode.
According to a later writing by Mary Shelley, because of the combination of wine and laudanum, at one point Percy got up and ran out of the room screaming because he thought that Mary's nipples had become demonic eyes.
Do. Carrie's random fact.
See your face with that. I'm not disappointed. He got so high and so wasted that he looked at his lover and saw her nipples and was like, demon eyes! And then ran out of the room screaming.
Wow.
And that's actually because Mary Shelley, she wrote a travel log of the journeys, and that was in her travel log.
Brilliant. Price.
So,
I don't know where to go from here.
Because truth is stranger than fiction.
Oh yes.
Eventually, the poems and stories ran dry, but they were all telling each other. So Byron set a challenge to the group to write a horror story of their own. You've got like dark rain clouds, ash, thunderstorms. Let's write a horror story.
Perfect setting for it.
Byron brought a vampire story that, by all accounts, was not his finest work. A bit of a wet lettuce, by the sounds of it. Shelley started to write about his own childhood.
That's Percy
Shelley.
Yeah.
But realised that there's only so much trauma one could take, and he abandoned the project.
Wow.
Yeah, he's like, I'm going to write about no, I'm not going to write about my childhood. was too scary. Polidori and Mary Shelley, however, really rose to the challenge. Polidori wrote a story called The Vampire, which is credited with being one of the original vampire stories depicting the creatures roughly as we know them now, and even went on to inspire a guy called Bram Stoker to pen a little-known novel you might have heard of, called Dracula.
Oh.
So yeah, that was like the OG vampire as like this aristocratic creature.
Oh. Mary, meanwhile, had taken an idea born to her following a conversation between Byron and Percy about corpse reanimation and ran with it, creating one of the most powerful and thought-provoking works of horror science fiction. She revealed the concept to the group, and over the next week or two, whilst Percy and Byron went off on a boys' break to Montreal, finishing up her story, Polidori stayed with Mary and turned his short story into a novel as well, apparently also developing somewhat of a deep infatuation for Mary, which was decidedly unrequited.
Yeah, so he stayed there to write and to pine, and she was like, thanks, but I'm writing.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Bye.
I'd rather spend my time with the dead girl. Partway through the tour, the news broke about the death of Harriet Shelley, and a few weeks after learning he was a widower, Percy and Mary were married, with her taking his surname and finally becoming known officially as Mary Shelley. Her completed novel, Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, was published a year later, and whilst critics were divided, audiences loved it, and they still do.
The high of her novel success were not to last, however. In 1818 and 1819, Mary suffered the loss of 2 further children with Percy, the tragedy causing a rift between the couple and leading to Mary developing a deep depression. The marriage between Percy and Mary had not been all wine and poetry. There had been multiple issues from the start, including infidelity and distrust, as well as substantial debts. The family had moved to Marlow in Buckinghamshire in 1817, along with Claire and her baby by Byron, Allegra. Mary appeared to have resented the presence of Claire and Allegra in the family home, which wasn't helped when, shortly after giving birth to a daughter in September 1817, Mary had to watch her husband and her stepsister leave together for London, leaving her behind with the baby who did not survive infancy. So Percy ran off with her sister?
Yep.
As in, ran off.
We don't know if they had a relationship, but they vanished to London for a time. Whilst in London, however, Percy was arrested on account of debts he owed, leading to Mary being paid a visit at home in Marlow by his attorneys. So he's gone off with her stepsister, leaving her with a baby who would not survive infancy, and then she gets a knock on the door going, "Oh yeah, your husband's been arrested."
Brilliant.
Percy was an outspoken atheist, and he published works such as Leon and Sisna, which attacked organised religion and referenced incest, as well as works about reforming the British government. One of his most renowned poems, Ozymandias, written in December 1817, is an interesting and thinly veiled commentary on the concept of how the mighty do fall. None of this helped to improve his reputation or financial position, though. So, creditors weren't going to give him money because he had bad debts, and people weren't going to give him their patronage because he was an outspoken atheist, and his poems referenced incest and things. So the family were eventually forced once again to go abroad.
Eventually, Mary gave birth to a son, Percy Florence Shelley, who became her only child to survive beyond infancy, and his middle name given to him from the city of his birth, Florence in Italy, where the family were living at the time. It is believed that, whilst there, Percy started an affair with a ward of one of his uncles, who happened to be staying in the same place, named Sophia Stacey, which could not have made things easy for Mary with a young baby. Worse still, there were rumours that Percy had fathered a baby named Alina by Mary's stepsister Claire. Claire and Mary later denied this story, but the relationship between the two women would never recover.
It's basically like publicly saying, no, that didn't happen, but staring daggers at each other constantly.
Yeah.
The family moved to Pisa, place with the Leaning Tower, where I don't know why I felt the need to.
She did the Leaning Tower with her arm length.
Yeah, my arm length. Where they again fell in with their old friend, Lord Byron. Yay, Byron. And whilst within his circle of friends, Percy met and became very close with a woman named Jane Williams, who was there with her partner. Going so far as to write her love poems, which were very much not subtle. Some of them had the names like the serpent denied at the gate and things like that. They were not subtle.
Oh, wow.
Percy also invited Claire to come and stay with them in Pisa, which is where she learned that her daughter by Byron, Allegra, had sadly died of typhus. The communal grief was further compounded when, on the 16th of June 1822, Mary suffered another miscarriage, and, had it not been for Percy's lucky intervention and primitive first aid, she would likely have died. She survived, however, further tragedy was waiting in the wings, because...
More tragedy.
Yeah, you can't just... apparently with Mary Shelley, you can't just have one death, you have to have several.
On the 1st of July 1822, Percy went out sailing with his friend and partner of his lover Jane, Edward Williams, in the Gulf of Spiza on Percy's new boat, the Don Juan.
Don Juan.
Don Juan. Sorry, tooth.
That's right.
Named after a work by Byron, which had so impressed Percy that he later declared to Mary that he had no hope of ever reveling the man.
I mean, no shade on Percy, but you ain't never going to be a Byron.
Well, no. The boat was new and the crew were by no means experienced sailors, so when a storm hit, they were in trouble. The weather overwhelmed them and the boat sunk. 10 days later, the badly decomposed body of Percy Shelley was washed ashore.
Via Regia.
Of course. He was cremated on the nearby beach on the 16th of August 1822, and his ashes were interred in the Protestant cemetery of Rome.
It is alleged that his heart refused to burn in the pyre, with some reasons including calcification from previous illnesses, like a form of tuberculosis, given as a possible cause, or it could have been mistaken and it was actually part of his liver, not his heart. The heart... Gonna keep calling it the heart, was retrieved, pickled in wine, and after some resistance from the guy who retrieved it because he wanted to keep it because he was a fan, it was handed over to Mary and taken for burial back in England. Now a widow, aged only 24.
So all of that happened in 8 years?
Yep.
Jesus.
Miscarriages, family tragedy, now a widow, aged 24.
Wow.
Mary had to work hard to support herself and her son, Percy Florence, so she turned to her talent of writing.
Mary wrote several more novels, including a science fiction tale named The Last Man, but none would reach the success of Frankenstein. She also published a copy of her travelogue from her journey with Byron and Polidori, including one of Percy's poems in there. Mary would also work hard to promote her late husband's poems posthumously, but would never go on to marry again.
Her son, Percy Florence, grew up to be an educated gentleman, and, following the death of his grandfather Timothy Shelley in 1844, the family title passed to him, and he became Baron Sir Percy Florence Shelley, 3rd Baronet of Castle Goring in Sussex. He had no children himself, though. He did have an adopted daughter, and on his death, the baronetcy passed to his cousin by Percy's younger brother.
Mary devoted her later years to her son and to her writing, though she suffered from several bouts of debilitating illness. Eventually, on the 1st of February 1851, aged just 53, Mary died. It is believed of brain cancer. Her remains are interred with her husband's heart and now that of her parents and son in St. Peter's Church in Bournemouth. A life shrouded in romanticised legend, lived through heartache, heartbreak and misfortune, had finally come to an end, but her legacy was just beginning.
I mean, she has so many myths about her, including the one story that allegedly she lost her virginity against her mother's grave.
Brilliant.
Which, like, if you want to be a gothic novelist, that's the kind of stuff you have to do. But the fact that she went through so much and she lost so much and she fought through a frankly, at times, toxic relationship, all before she was 24.
That's crazy. And never married again.
Yeah, never married again. And the fact that, like, the part of her life where she was focused so much on her writing and creating these incredible stories was the lesser interesting part of her life.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But she's known for Frankenstein.
Yes.
So, it would be remiss of us to talk about the woman and not talk about her creation, especially as it is Spooky Month. Have you ever actually read Frankenstein?
I think I've read parts of it, but I don't think I've read the entire thing.
We had to read some of it at school, I remember.
Yeah, I think that's what I did at school.
Yeah, I was interested, and I have a copy of it at home if you ever want to borrow it. And I have read it, and I've read it. I read it when I was younger, and I didn't quite get it. And then I read it again when I was older. I was like, oh, I get it now. It's very well written. It's dark, but also not dark. But it really is thought-provoking. It makes you think, and not for the reasons that you would think it makes you think. Yeah.
Because I've always thought that the big thing about it is, like, what's worse, the man or the monster?
That is the point. And you kind of, you expect it to be the monster, but then you find yourself actually kind of sympathizing with him. And yeah, it's interesting. I would, if anyone's thinking about it, I would recommend it.
Yeah. So, there have been a total of 65 film adaptations of Frankenstein, and the monster has been referenced in many, many more films, TV shows, novels, and even musicals. The monster is one of the most iconic Halloween costumes, and there are very few people with access to modern media who wouldn't recognise the character. But let's dispel 2 quick myths.
First, and it's the big one, Frankenstein is not the name of the monster. Sort of. The book asks the same question that other iconic stories like Beauty and the Beast and The Hunchback of Notre Dame ask. In fact, the Disney adaptation of Hunchback, the character of Cloper, who kind of introduces the story, he phrases it best. He sings, "Here is a riddle to guess if you can, sing the bells of Notre Dame. Who is the monster and who is the man?"
That's really cool.
Dr. Victor Frankenstein is the one who created the creature. He is the modern Prometheus described by the book's subtitle. Because Prometheus in Greek legend helped to create humankind.
Mm-hmm.
And in sometimes he's actually, sometimes Zeus is credited purely with it, sometimes Prometheus is credited, but he's the one who, and then he suffered for it afterwards, because he gave humans fire. He stole fire and gave it to humans, and Zeus, in retaliation for him stealing fire from the Olympians, chained him to a rock, and every day a giant eagle comes and pecks out his liver, and then his body regenerates, and then the next day the bird comes back again and does it.
Brilliant.
So he created this masterpiece and then suffered for it.
Mm-hmm.
The creature he creates is called Adam. And whilst he does carry out terrible crimes like rape and murder, he was created and then abandoned into a world he doesn't understand. And he was like ostracized. People were scared of him, and eventually hunted and killed by a grave robbing mad scientist. So who is the monster, really?
Secondly, the monster, Adam, was not the lumbering green grotesque creature that is often depicted. Yes, he would have had some scars from literally being put together, but according to the book, he was created to be beautiful in his maker's eyes and look like a man. The most accurate representations in line with the book, and for this reason, are probably the Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller stage versions, which were a masterclass in physical acting. Absolutely. Or Rory Kinnear in the TV series Penny Dreadful, who gave one of the most heart-wrenching and human performances to that character that has ever been seen.
Yeah, he has this beautiful scene in like a soup kitchen kind of thing with Ava Green's character, and he talks about the book Paradise Lost, and you see this human, fully articulate, like really deep feeling character who's been absolutely abandoned by his creator. And Rory Kinnear plays a blinder in that. I mean, he's a fantastic actor anyway,
Yeah.
but he plays a blinder in that. And the Cumberbatch Johnny Lee Miller, that was, I was lucky enough to see it on both nights. So I saw it on stage one night and in theatre the next night in cinema. So I saw the one where on stage I saw Johnny Lee Miller as Victor Frankenstein and Benedict Cumberbatch as a monster, and then in cinema I saw it the other way around.
That's cool.
And they kind of showed him being almost as if he was born out of a womb and then learning to walk and talk. And, oh my god, it was incredible. It was insane the way they just threw themselves around that stage, but it was beautiful. Yeah. Sorry.
Amazing.
With that out of the way, the idea of opening your door to trick-or-treaters on Halloween and seeing Frankenstein's monster is a great one, and it's wonderful to have such an iconic character still thriving. We would absolutely recommend either reading the novel or going and seeing one of the many adaptations, though. The story isn't for the faint of heart, especially when you know that the science behind it isn't actually all that flawed, and the fact that body thieves were very much a real issue in the recent past. It does cover some troubling topics beyond the whole building a man from the dead people idea, but it does make you think about what it actually means to be human and how quickly that can change into something much, much darker.
Her life is really sad.
It was really, really sad, and you can see that come through in her works. There's this theme of abandonment and this theme of loss all the way through, and like self-discovery. And she said in her writings later on that from what happened after that point and all the loss and everything she suffered, she looks back on Frankenstein as the birth of something that was a happy time in her life. And the fact that the novel Frankenstein was a happy time in her life when there was a storm going on and everything outside kind of says something about her and what she went through.
She went through a lot, and to keep starting to get to 53, like
Yeah.
losing that many children and her father and her stepsister and her half sister and her husband multiple times
Yeah.
after being ostracized for being with said husband.
And the fact that it was emotional, like it wasn't just physical loss of these people dying and leaving her, it was the emotional loss of people just like abandoning her and just hurting her constantly.
Wow.
Constant pain. Bless her. So that was Mary Shelley.
Bless.
We're keeping the spooky month going next week, but first we have a ridiculous death, do we not?
We do. We absolutely do. And now this one is, I mean, I was looking for a ridiculous death because I always try and keep them in this kind of same time period.
Mhm.
And this is from 1793. So in the 17th. So it's still
about five years before Mary Shelley was born.
Yeah, so it's still relevant.
Yeah.
And
Agency era.
yeah, we are in America. And we're with a guy called Samuel Spencer. He was an American judge, a lawyer, and a military officer from Anson County in North Carolina. He was born in January of 1734, and he went to Princeton University. It was called Nassau College at the time, but is now Princeton University, where he got his law degree. And then he moved to South Carolina, where he married Philippa Civil Tisdale and had children, Mary, Claudius, and William Samuel Spencer.
Claudius.
I know, right? Okay. He moved to Anston County in 1774 and acquired 2,000 acres of land. So he had a lot of money. He was elected to represent Anson County in the first North Carolina Provincial Congress, because this was around, obviously, the American Revolution. Prior to that, he was a colonel in the local militia, probably Anson County as the colonel militia, and he was at the Battle of Alamance in 1771, supporting the royal government, but his loyalty changed at the time of the American Revolution approached.
Okay.
So he was kind of known. He
yeah, it's quite a prestigious life, to be fair.
Yeah, and he kind of remained that way as during his life and during the time he was in South Carolina. So he was quite well known. He was quite well off. He was kind of one of those people like you know him. You give him a bit of respect. He wasn't like up there, but he had some respect.
Yeah.
However, he it was 1793. He was resting at his home on Smith's Creek in Anson County, where he died under somewhat unusual circumstances, shall we say.
Which is why we love it.
It is reported that he hadn't been feeling well, and between his court sessions, because he was still working as a lawyer, he was resting at his home. He was sitting on his porch, kind of like laying on his porch. He was wearing a red cap upon his head. So a red hat upon his head.
Okay.
He began to sleep. And at this point, a large turkey thought that the moving cap was another turkey. He saw it as a challenge, and he attacked. He was thrown from his chair, and he suffered numerous scratches and was gouged and killed by the turkey.
As someone who has personally had beef with a turkey before, I have been attacked by a turkey. They are not to be messed with.
Yeah, but this man
died.
This dude was just having a nap. And you know when you're kind of like in deep sleep and obviously you breathe, your head kind of, your whole body kind of goes in and out. So that's just what he was doing. So the hat was moving. And the turkey was like, that's another turkey. I'm going to kill him.
Thing is,
I just pecked the shit and killed this man.
This is a man who survived battles. But imagine
multiple battles, the American Revolution.
But the last thing you hear on this earth is a really aggressive as this turkey just fucks you up.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awkward.
He probably wasn't a fan of eating turkey on American Thanksgiving.
Maybe that was it. Maybe the turkey was getting revenge.
Maybe.
Maybe.
But yeah,
Yeah, so
poor Samuel Spencer.
if you're out in the American Midwest, I would suggest not having a red cap on your belly while you sleep, just, because in England it was surprise cow. In America it's surprise turkey.
Could there be any more American in English, though, if we tried? This was like death by drowning in a cup of tea. I mean, there are worse ways to go for me.
I mean, it would be if you fell into the Boston River.
We were going to talk about the Boston Tea Party, Carrie. That makes me sad.
Yeah,
A lot of tea was wasted in that river.
that was not a party.
It was not a party. Yeah, so we'll end this note on poor Samuel Spencer, death by turkey.
And we shall be back next week for a howling good time. Hey, oh,
That wasn't scripted or nothing.
funny. Funny looking.
Oh, shut up.